Which movies will be 50 years old in 2024? The 1970s were a great decade for film. Some consider it the best decade for American movies. That makes golden anniversaries especially good for movie fans these days, as the 1974 films celebrate their 50th anniversary. Here are notable films turning 50 in 2024. 1 of 20. Flaming Saddles. Mel Brooks was the king of scams in the 1970s. The rip on the Western was written by Richard Pryor, although Clevin Little ended up starring alongside Gene Wilder. Blazing Saddles is often discussed as a movie that wasn't made today, an area in which we have no interest. It's a silly, take-no-prisoners comedy that many still consider a great movie of all time. 2 of 20. Godzilla vs Mechagodzilla. Toho's first Godzilla film was a somewhat sad meditation on nuclear weapons. Then, the Godzilla movies became about him fighting other monsters. These kaiju movies tend to look a little dated, but they can be fun. Godzilla vs Mechagodzilla is one of the best of the bunch. Godzilla fights his robot version. What more could you ask for? 3 out of 20. Sugarland Express. Sugarland Express is good. It features Goldie Hawn. However, it is one of the most important films released in 1974. The reason is simple and depends on the director. This is Steven Spielberg's first theatrical film, launching an illustrious and iconic career. 4 out of 20. Conversation. The 70s were full of movies about paranoia. The Conversation sounds almost strange, mostly because of the technology used. Gene Hackman plays a man whose job it is to spy on people and record their conversations, with the equipment of the time making it a more complicated job. However, Hackman's character, a deeply paranoid man at his best, senses that he may have discovered something sinister. John Cazale co-stars in Francis Ford Coppola's film, so you know it's nominated for Best Picture. 5 out of 20. Parallax View. Talking about the paranoia of the 70s. Parallax View is the least film of Paranoia trilogy by Alan J. Pakula. That's not a condemnation, though, because it's up against Clot and All the President's Men, 2 quality films. This one starring Warren Beatty is pretty good and definitely worth watching to finish off the trilogy. 6 out of 20. Chinatown. Yes, the director of Chinatown isn't a character anyone wants to talk about, but there's a reason why this film is considered by many to be an all-time classic of the noir genre. It's a dirty and nasty story, but the film is very well acted, led by Jack Nicholson in one of his breakthrough roles. The following year, Nicholson won Best Actor for One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. 7 out of 20. California Divide. Robert Altman made 2 movies in 1974 because the guy liked to stay busy. Of the 2, California Gap is definitely better and is one of his top 5 films. George Segal and Elliot Gould star together in this unrelenting portrayal of decadent gambling that is neither condemned nor patronized. From what we've heard, this is something Altman has had first-hand experience with. 8 out of 20. Harry and Tanto. Paul Mazursky was a good director and Harry and Tanto is quite a good movie. It is destined to be remembered forever for another reason. Art Carney won Best Actor for his performance in this film. Other candidates: Albert Finney, Dustin Hoffman, Jack Nicholson, and Al Pacino. 9 out of 20. The Longest Yard. Burt Reynolds' charisma was central to The Longest Yard, the most important sports film of 1974. He plays Paul Crow, a former professional defense attorney who teams up a team of his convicts to play football against prison guards. Of course, the guards are not interested in losing, no matter what. The Longest Yard was later remade starring Adam Sandler. 10 out of 20. The Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Simply put, it is one of the most important horror films ever made. It's scary, it's gory, and in some ways it foreshadowed the found footage era of horror movies. Also, let's be honest. The Texas Chainsaw Massacre is a wonderful title for a horror film, and the tagline is "Who will survive and what will be left of them?" Top 10 slogans from any genre. 11 of 20. Getting My Pelham 123. One of the top crime thrillers of the 1970s, Taking Pelham 123 is one of those watch stories that always hums along and rarely takes a wrong step. It's a 70s type movie with Walter Matthau as the main and apparent hero. He's just a guy who works for the New York City Transit Police and then finds himself dealing with thieves who have taken a train car and its passengers hostage. 12 out of 20. Black Christmas. Black Christmas comes up often around these parts, so we'll get to the highlights. When it comes to founding the slasher genre in the US, although it was made in Canada, this movie predates Halloween. It was also directed by Bob Kellerk, who also directed Porky's and A Christmas Story and has a bonkers filmography. If you care about horror, and specifically slashers, it's a must-see. 13 of 20. Phantom of the Paradise. It feels like Carrie and Phantom of the Paradise should be flip-flopped in Brian De Palma's filmography. Wouldn't it make sense if he directed the popular, critically acclaimed Stephen King adaptation and then cashed that check to make this utterly bizarre musical horror comedy instead? De Palma made the swing and then kind of ended up directing Carrie to avoid a lengthy stint in movie jail. Phantom of the Paradise is now considered a cult classic by many. 14 of 20. Murder on the Orient Express. Before Kenneth Branagh made donning Hercule Poirot's mustache the center of his career, Agatha Christie adaptations already existed. Sidney Lumet's take on Murder on the Orient Express is, if nothing else, the most successful critically. It has an incredible cast key to a Christie adaptation, and Ingrid Bergman won Best Supporting Actress at the Oscars. 15 of 20. Alice Doesn't Live Here Anymore. It wasn't Martin Scorsese's first film, or even his first major movie. That would be 1973's Mean Streets, which is a classic Scorsese film, built upon crime, gangsters, and Catholic guilt. What Alice Doesn't Live Here Anymore did, though, was show that Scorsese was no one-trick pony. It's a dramedy about a widowed mother of one who returns to her hometown to rebuild her life. Ellen Burstyn won Best Actress, and the film was adapted into the TV show Alice. 16 of 20. F for Fake. F for Fake was the last hurrah of Orson Welles as an interesting figure in culture. He still had the cash to take a big swing, and suddenly this film, which Welles starred in, directed, and co-wrote, proved to be that. Something of a film essay in the style of Spalding Gray, but more dynamic. It turns itself on its head when Welles takes it from ostensibly a documentary about an art forger into something more. 17 of 20. The Towering Inferno. AHH, the all-star disaster film. They don't make movies like this anymore, to use a well-worn phrase. Steve McQueen and Paul Newman shared the lead in this film about a new skyscraper that bursts into flames, trapping many people inside. The disaster film is about action, melodrama, and the triumph of the human spirit. The Towering Inferno is perhaps the finest version of that. 18 of 20. Young Frankenstein. That's right. Mel Brooks had two iconic comedies come out the same year. However, Young Frankenstein was as much a passion project for Gene Wilder, the star, as Brooks. In fact, Wilder only agreed to be in the film if Brooks didn't play a role, or even cameo. He didn't want it to be as silly as, say, Blazing Saddles. Two classic comedies, two different vibes. 19 of 20. The Godfather Part 2. Think Brooks had an impressive 1974, Francis Ford Coppola had The Conversation and The Godfather Part 2. He beat himself for Best Picture with the sequel to The Godfather, which of course also won Best Picture. Coppola was on top of the world. Then he made Apocalypse Now and almost died in the process. That's 70s filmmaking at its finest. 20 out of 20. The Man with the Golden Gun. Just in time for Christmas, the newest James Bond movie dropped. Roger Moore was in the role at the time, and thus the Man with the Golden Gun is on the sillier side. No, not as silly as Moonraker, but silly nonetheless. Bond finds himself on the private island of a high-priced hitman who likes to play lethal cat-and-mouse games in a weird funhouse. Hey, at least his gun is gold. Which movies will...
It can show you what you want. Living life, every day, late at night, not okay. All I want, and I pray, all I need are some better days.